Deep in the depths of human history, there exists knowledge whose traces are barely discernible among crumbling tablets, worn-out symbols, and obscure legends. Each vanished tradition left behind only hints, like the diffuse light from long-extinguished stars. These secret fragments point to forgotten sciences, rituals of observation, and lost ways of understanding the world when wisdom was measured not by time, but by the depth of hidden meaning. The lost science of Lam. Far to the south of the ancient continent, among hills covered in dry thickets and stubborn winds, there lived a people whose knowledge has long been the stuff of legend. The Lemba, vanished masters of crafts and invisible sciences, left behind only scattered traces. They lived at the crossroads of trade routes, but their own tradition seemed to evade writing, concealing itself in oral codes that are impossible to fully reconstruct. Researchers have long noted the unusual nature of artifacts found in rare sites attributed to the Lemba. Stone vessels, unlike those of neighboring cultures or later traditions, bear traces of processing, as if they used heating and cooling methods beyond the technological level of the time. The surfaces of their artifacts are sometimes polished to a mirror shine without the use of metal tools, a fact that still astonishes experts today. But the greatest mystery remains the legendary science of stone breathing, a term preserved in the later legends of neighboring peoples. It sounds like a metaphor, but researchers believe it may have referred to a complex cycle of mineral processing involving heat, water, and some unknown catalyst. Traces of unusual chemical reactions on vessel fragments indicate a technology superior to the craftsmanship of simple farmers. There's another line of mystery. According to ethnographers, the Lemba built small sanctuaries where each stone block was placed with a precision unachievable with primitive tools. Traces of microscopic surface smoothing indicate that the craftsmen used a technique that allowed them to control the stone structure. Where they acquired such knowledge remains unanswered. Some researchers suggest the influence of more ancient civilizations, but no direct evidence has been found. Of particular interest are references to their star guidance. Several tribes living near the Lemba claimed that the people possessed the ability to determine not only seasonal cycles, but also rare celestial events. A study of the positions of ancient sanctuaries reveals that some are aligned with complex astronomical points, including the moments of invisible planetary conjunctions. Such knowledge is difficult to explain without a developed observational tradition. However, the Lemba never wrote down their methods. Their scholars, if one can call these masters that, passed on their knowledge through hints, symbols, and practices. Everything was based on years of training, with almost no words. It is believed that their students underwent long periods of silence, observing nature and imitating the movements of their mentors. Thus, the loss of several generations could destroy the entire accumulated knowledge without leaving a single written trace. The reason for their disappearance is shrouded in mystery. Some believe the Lemba split into many small groups, losing their unified tradition. Others believe they disappeared due to changing climate conditions, taking with them knowledge they were unable to pass on to new generations. But there's also a third, mystical theory, according to which their disappearance is linked to the end of a special cycle described in the forgotten myths of neighboring peoples. Archaeological excavations are rare and fragmentary, but each discovery adds further detail to the mystery. In some places, strange stone platforms have been discovered, too small for rituals and too strong for ordinary household tasks. Their surfaces appear to have been treated by a process reminiscent of modern thermal modification. Researchers speculate that these may have been laboratory bases for mineral-related experiments. There's also talk of the legendary fine balance, a device mentioned only in one later legend. It supposedly measured not mass, but the force of a substance, whatever that might mean. Perhaps this was an attempt to estimate the density of minerals or their ability to heat and cool. If such a device truly existed, it would indicate a level of engineering incomparably advanced for their time. Modern scientists are trying to piece together what remains. Analysis of the finds shows that the Lemba may have possessed knowledge of the behavior of minerals, the properties of light refraction, and precise geometry. They seem to strive for an ideal form, as if they believed the world to be orderly and calculable. Their science was not abstract. It served crafts, rituals, and observations of the world. But most importantly, their art vanished as quietly as it had existed. Leaving behind no drawings, no tablets, no texts, the Lemba vanished into history, leaving only whispers of a lost science whose principles could have transformed our understanding of early civilizations. Today, this mystery remains a reminder of how fragile knowledge is in the face of time, and how easily entire worlds of meaning vanish if no one has time to record them. Knowledge of the Temple of Edfu. Amid the sands of Upper Egypt rises a temple whose walls seem crafted not only from stone, but also from the multi-layered memory of the ancient world. Dedicated to the deity Horus, Edfu was always more than a cult center. Its texts, symbols, and architecture preserved traces of vanished knowledge, the origins of which still evoke debate among scholars. The temple seems designed to conceal meaning within the depths of its own stone shadows. One of Edfu's most enigmatic legacies is the so-called world-building texts. Its walls contain descriptions of a time before the advent of known civilization, when, according to legend, the wise men of the primeval lands taught people the art of form and measure. These builders, whose names have long been lost, supposedly possessed the ability to combine stone and space in such a way that architecture became a reflection of cosmic order. Some researchers believe these texts convey fragments of more ancient knowledge, possibly dating back to forgotten eras. They describe the planning of sanctuaries according to a celestial pattern, with each column, wall, and niche aligned with a specific section of the starry sky. At Edfu, this idea reaches its apogee. The temple stands as if oriented toward rare celestial events, barely discernible without extensive observation. But the main challenge for scholars isn't the inscriptions themselves, but their hidden system. The Edfu texts contain phrases that seem to hint at the existence of another form of writing, symbolic, combined, intended only for initiates. Some walls of the temple are decorated with sequences of signs not found in other monuments. This has led to speculation about a second code at Edfu, a lost symbolic language used to convey secret knowledge. It is believed that the priests kept special tablets containing information on the movements of celestial bodies. Legends mention plates of light used to study solar and lunar cycles. This may be a metaphor, but the discovery of small stone discs with fine lines and divisions raises the possibility that the temple was not only a religious center, but also a laboratory for ancient astronomy. The architecture of Edfu deserves special attention. The temple walls are so massive and precise that it seems as if the builders had a keen understanding of load distribution and resonance. Some rooms emit barely audible sounds with the slightest movement of air. Perhaps the priests used acoustics for rituals or the transmission of information. The courtyards are designed so that the sun's rays penetrate deep on certain days of the year, illuminating only one relief element, indicating precise calculations. But why did so much of this knowledge disappear? One theory suggests that the Edfu repositories were lost during catastrophic events, floods, or the intervention of later rulers who considered the ancient texts dangerous. Another theory suggests that the priests themselves may have destroyed or concealed the records when they sensed a decline approaching. Their task was not to preserve knowledge at any cost, but to maintain a balance that had been disrupted by the advent of new eras. It has become common among researchers that the Edfu texts may have contained information about ancient measurements of the Earth. One fragment mentions a path of 1,000 steps of light, which is interpreted as a mysterious system of length. Some believe the priests had insights into the curvature of the planet or methods for measuring distances using the stars. These assumptions sound bold, but the enigmatic lines on some slabs support such ideas. There's also a mystical hypothesis. According to it, the knowledge of Edfu wasn't simply scientific or religious, but belonged to a distinct tradition combining observation, ritual, and geometry. The priests believed that the world could be understood through form, and that each form carried power. In this context, the temple was not a building, but an instrument capable of influencing spatial perception. The loss of such knowledge signifies not only the disappearance of information, but also the loss of a different way of thinking. Today, researchers continue to decipher the texts, study the temple's structure, and search for traces of lost tablets. But each step leads to even greater questions. Much points to the existence of a hidden level of knowledge, either deliberately concealed or lost forever. Edfu becomes a place where the past is not explained, but only deepens the mystery, revealing the silent traces of lost wisdom. The mystery of the Nineveh libraries. When archaeologists first recovered baked clay tablets from the ruins of Nineveh, they expected to find only economic records and royal decrees. But it soon became clear the ancient capital of Assyria held much more. It was the center of a vanished intellectual tradition, traces of which are scattered among cracks and melted symbols. The libraries of Nineveh turned out to be more than just repositories. They were a structured system for the transmission of knowledge, part of which disappeared long before the city's destruction. The most famous collection is that of King Ashurbanipal, but researchers are certain it was only a fragment of a larger network of temple archives. In some underground chambers discovered near the main ruins, the remains of shelves that could once have held thousands of tablets were discovered. However, the texts are almost entirely missing, as if their disappearance was not the result of a random catastrophe, but part of a deliberate act, the mystery of which remains unsolved. Particularly intriguing is the cataloging system found in only a few surviving tablets. They mention books that have never been found. The titles are striking in their subject matter. The Path of the Visible Shadow, Tablets of the Inner Light, Lists of the Fixed Stars. If such records truly existed, then the libraries of Nineveh contained data that went far beyond the scope of ordinary administrative activities. Some researchers believe that Assyrian scribes possessed unique coding techniques. Several fragments reveal the repetition of symbols in an unusual order, reminiscent of a structure designed for specialized reading. Perhaps some texts were not direct inscriptions, but diagrams or instructions using symbols for new purposes. If so, we are dealing with a vanished form of writing within the standard cuneiform script. There are also surviving records that the priests of Nineveh were trained in a variety of disciplines, including mathematics, timekeeping, and celestial observation. Their records of planetary movements are distinguished by a precision that astounds scholars. But a particularly mysterious aspect is the mention of the so-called Shakimu protocolists, people who, according to ancient accounts, recorded events inaccessible to the average observer. What exactly they recorded is unknown, but legends speak of mists of time and signs at the ends of the earth. Some scholars suggest that the lost texts may have included observations of natural phenomena with a complex system of calculations. This theory is supported by tablets with series of numbers that do not correspond to any known calendar. Perhaps the priests used cycles based on rare astronomical events, but if so, why would they need them? Such knowledge was likely used in religious rituals, giving the priesthood a unique control over time. There's also a mystical theory that part of the library was inaccessible to ordinary scribes. Ancient legends mention halls where no one breathes, possibly closed chambers where texts of particular importance were kept. These chambers were supposedly illuminated by light from minerals, suggesting phosphorescent porous rocks. If such chambers truly existed, they could have served as a center for the study of secret knowledge. Why did most of these archives disappear? Some blame devastating fires, others political upheaval. However, there is a more profound hypothesis. Assyrian scribes themselves destroyed or concealed dangerous knowledge when they felt threatened. Texts were believed to possess power and could bring about change in the world, so during critical periods, priests could deliberately erase entire layers of information to maintain balance. The remains of Nineveh's libraries are now being studied using modern technology. Laser scanners can reveal barely visible symbols hidden beneath layers of soot. Some signs, previously thought to be random cracks, were revealed to be part of a complex pattern. But even with new reading methods, a significant portion of the content remains inaccessible. The ruins reveal the presence not only of lost knowledge, but also of an intention to conceal it from the future. It is this combination of vast intellectual tradition and its near-complete disappearance that makes the Nineveh libraries one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. They remind us that knowledge can be not only lost, but also deliberately concealed. Each charred fragment hints at a coherent system where science, ritual, and governance were woven into a single order. And today, millennia later, this order continues to slip away, leaving only a flickering trace of forgotten meanings. Lost Mayan texts, hidden among the dense jungles of the Yucatan, where stone pyramids rise from a green ocean of foliage, lies one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world: the lost texts of the Maya. This civilization, which left behind thousands of carved symbols, complex calendars, and architecture governed by mathematical harmony, is known to us only through a tiny fraction of its written tradition. Most of their books, created on amate wood and covered in thin layers of lime, have vanished as if dissolved in time. The reasons for the loss of this knowledge are manifold. Some texts perished in the tropical humidity, others in wars between city-states. But the most devastating blow came during the late conquest, when many inhabitants were forced to destroy their own records to save sacred knowledge from those who considered it a manifestation of illicit power. According to legend, Mayan priests believed that each word in a book not only recorded the world, but also connected earth and heaven through a special spiritual flow. According to myths, the Maya possessed a vast library located in the heart of an ancient city, possibly Tikal or Yaxchilan. These texts could have contained everything from a history of the world to tables of celestial events, from descriptions of lost rituals to instructions on how to interact with the spirits of the elements. However, no mention of the library's location has been found. Some researchers speculate that it was divided into parts and hidden in various cities to avoid destruction. A particular mystery arises from references to so-called Books of Horizons. These were texts that, according to later Native American traditions, described the cycles of not only the sun and moon, but also rare astronomical phenomena observed once every few centuries. Modern researchers still do not understand how the Maya could have recorded such long cycles, given that their written traditions spanned a limited number of generations. Perhaps they relied on earlier sources that have not survived. But even more intriguing is the idea that some books contain knowledge about the Earth's movements. The Maya are known to have had astonishingly accurate calculations of solar and lunar eclipses. However, the lost texts may have included more complex observations, for example, data on precession or the wobble of the Earth's axis. If even some of this knowledge truly existed, then the Maya possessed understanding of cosmic cycles that were significantly advanced in their time. Among the discovered fragments are symbols that defy decipherment. Some resemble combinations of glyphs grouped together, which could function not only as words, but also as formulas. Scholars suggest that the Maya used a unique calculation system in which each symbol could represent not just a number, but an entire mathematical operation. Such structures are particularly common in texts related to time rituals. There are also reports of books devoted to the structure of the human body and psyche. According to later chronicles, Mayan priests believed that humans consisted of several shells, each with its own developmental cycles and responding to changes in the cosmos. Some researchers believe these descriptions may have contained early forms of psychological or medical knowledge, lost due to the destruction of the texts. Also lost were the tree books, records of sacred forests and plants used in healing, divination, and rituals. Modern ethnobotanists are confident that the Maya possessed an unusually profound knowledge of plant properties. But without written sources, this tradition can only be partially reconstructed. Legends speak of special tables of plant interactions that link them to the phases of the moon and spiritual beings. It remains a mystery why some Mayan texts were deliberately hidden. Archaeologists occasionally uncover small caches containing clay vessels filled with charred remains of paper. Perhaps the custodians sought to protect the books by hiding them in deep caves or temples. Yet, even if some of these caches survived, it's unclear whether their papers survived the jungle humidity. There's a mystical theory that the lost Mayan texts contain knowledge about the transitions between eras. The calendar system contains references to great cycles associated with world changes. Perhaps the priests considered it dangerous to impart this knowledge to the uninitiated, and so they destroyed some of the records. Legends say that only those who passed special tests could read these books without risking upsetting the balance. Today, researchers are using new methods to read glyphs, analyzing discovered fragments, and constructing hypotheses about the structure of lost texts. But every reconstruction remains only a guess. The lost Mayan books are becoming a symbol of a vanished civilization whose thoughts, calculations, and observations are hidden in words that no longer exist. These texts are a reminder that knowledge can not only be lost, but also forever hidden in the labyrinths of time. The lost astronomy of Liangzhu. On the eastern plains of ancient China, where mist rises from rice terraces like the gentle breath of the earth, the Liangzhu culture once flourished, one of the most enigmatic civilizations of the distant past. It left behind magnificent jade artifacts, complex hydraulic structures, and traces of a social structure more advanced than that of neighboring peoples. But behind the glitter of these discovered objects lies a far deeper mystery, a lost astronomical system, which the Liangzhu apparently developed long before the development of known Eastern calendars. Of particular interest is the orientation of their sanctuaries and urban structures. Archaeologists have noted that many of them are built in strict alignment with solar cycles, but closer examination revealed something far more complex. The platforms are positioned so that their main axes correspond not only to the summer and winter solstices, but also to rare lunar positions that occur at intervals of many years. This requires observations that require generations of careful calculations. However, the Liangzhu did not leave behind a written language. Their knowledge existed in the form of rituals, structures, and symbols woven into sacred objects. At the center of their astronomical tradition were jade cylinders and discs, biyutin, known from finds. These artifacts are often viewed as ritual, but some researchers believe their proportions and arrangement of symbols reflect a special principle for observing celestial bodies. The thickness of the discs, the diameter of the holes, and the precise angles of the incisions indicate a system that could have been used as an instrument. Scholars hypothesize that the Yitsun cylinders served as a kind of celestial window, allowing the positions of the stars and moon to be recorded. If the openings are viewed at a certain angle, they focus light to highlight only certain parts of the sky. This could have been a way to calibrate observations for the priests. However, the lack of written instructions makes deciphering these functions extremely difficult. Even more mysterious are the enormous earthen platforms of Liangzhu, geometrically regular, often rectangular or trapezoidal structures. Some of them are interconnected by a system of linear alignments, forming diagrams reminiscent of maps of celestial movements. Traces of fire have been discovered at several sites, suggesting observations or rituals were conducted during special celestial events. Perhaps the fires were used to record celestial lines, later translating them into architecture. Particular attention was drawn to the strange patterns of markings found on some ceramic fragments. They don't resemble writing, but form sequences similar to codes for time cycles. Researchers speculate that these may have been records for priestly observers, marking specific points in forgotten astronomical periods. Certain groups of markings indicate cycles that coincide with fluctuations in the lunar orbit, which is surprising for a culture over 5,000 years old. The fragmented nature of the archaeological record complicates the task of reconstructing its system. It is believed that the disappearance of Liangzhu was linked to a major natural disaster, likely a devastating flood that disrupted economic and ritual structures. If the Liangzhu priests preserved their knowledge only orally and in the geometry of their sanctuaries, such a catastrophe could have destroyed everything at once: their observational schools, the continuity of cycles, and the legacy of centuries of experience. Therefore, their astronomy vanished almost instantly, leaving only traces. But there's a more mysterious explanation for the disappearance of their knowledge. Some researchers believe the Liangzhu priests possessed a unique view of time. They believed the world consisted of several layers of movement: solar, lunar, and spiritual time, which changed slowly and unevenly. If such a worldview existed, then their astronomy was not only instrumental, but also spiritual. In this case, jade artifacts could have served as conduits between cycles and rituals as a means of maintaining harmony. This theory is supported by the jade carvings. Some cylinders are decorated with spirals and lines, which, according to researchers, symbolize the movement of energy or streams of light. These symbols appear in specific combinations, as if reflecting a hidden matrix of celestial rhythms. Understanding this matrix may have been the foundation of Liangzhu astronomy, making it unique among ancient cultures. Modern analytical methods only allow us to begin to reconstruct their system. Modeling ancient observations shows that many sanctuaries were oriented not simply toward celestial bodies, but toward their extreme positions, apogees, perigees, and extreme tilts. Such precision requires a whole school of observers capable of passing on knowledge through generations. But this school has disappeared, leaving architecture and jade as the only witnesses. Today, Liangzhu is perceived as a civilization whose astronomy was inseparable from their worldview. Their knowledge combined observation and ritual, geometry and spirit, structure and symbol. The loss of this knowledge makes Liangzhu one of the most tragic secret cultures. They rose to an understanding of complex celestial patterns, but left no texts that would allow us to reconstruct their system. We see only traces, like imprints of thoughts that vanished long before the first chronicles were written. Olmec mirrors of knowledge. Amid the humid tropical forests of the Mexican highlands, where river sand mingles with mist to the color of ancient bone, archaeologists are discovering objects whose nature defies conventional wisdom. These are Olmec mirrors, discs of magnetite, hematite, and other iron minerals polished to an impossibly high shine. This ancient people, who stood at the origins of Mesoamerican civilizations, possessed a technology that seems bizarre, even in the context of later cultures. But most importantly, these mirrors were likely not simple tools, but carriers of lost knowledge. Objects found in burials and ritual complexes are striking in their precision craftsmanship. Their surfaces are so smooth that they reflect light almost like modern glass. Researchers speculate that creating such mirrors required not only advanced craftsmanship, but also an understanding of optics, which the Olmecs supposedly lacked. However, evidence strongly suggests otherwise. Some mirrors possess focusing properties capable of concentrating sunlight to the point of combustion. These properties have led to speculation that the mirrors may have been used for fire rituals or signaling. However, many finds were discovered in rooms without access to sunlight, suggesting a different purpose. They may have served as observation tools, not only for physical objects, but also for the symbolic structures of the world. Some mirrors have subtle notches along the edges, forming patterns reminiscent of an ancient numeric system. This suggests that the objects may have been part of a complex computing or ritual device. Olmec convex mirrors pose a particular mystery. They create distorted reflections, as if shifting the line between the visible and the hidden. They may have been used by priests to observe the starry sky in confined spaces. The reflection could reveal a section of the sky inaccessible to direct view. Some researchers believe such mirrors were used to record the positions of celestial bodies when the observer was inside the temple complex. There are references to mirrors being considered receptacles of power. In some ritual scenes, a priest is depicted holding a mirror while communicating with patron spirits. This suggests that the object acted as a kind of mediator, a channel between the human world and the world of the gods. In later Mesoamerican cultures, mirrors appear as attributes of deities of knowledge and time. They may have been symbols of astronomical power, allowing priests to control ritual cycles. But what exactly did these mirrors reflect? Several researchers have put forward a bold idea. The mirror's surface could serve as a model of the celestial vault. By placing a mirror at a certain angle and observing the reflection of the sun or stars, one could obtain an inverted map of the sky. This map allowed one to see the trajectories of celestial bodies differently than with direct observation, and possibly reveal patterns inaccessible to conventional methods. The Olmecs may have also used mirrors as timekeeping tools. Experiments have shown that by focusing reflected light on special markers, they can record the moments of solar events, equinoxes, solstices, and even rare transits of the stars. If mirrors truly served as elements of an astronomical device, then we are witnessing a lost science whose level of sophistication is far more complex than previously thought. An additional mystery is created by the clusters of mirrors found in some ritual sets. They are arranged so that they reflect each other, creating an endless series of light tunnels. This effect could have been used not only for rituals, but also as a way to visualize cyclical time, which was important to Mesoamerican cultures. In such structures, priests could have seen the repetition of world epochs or the interplay of natural forces. But why did this system disappear? Perhaps Olmec knowledge was transmitted to a small circle of initiates, and its disappearance was inevitable as social structures declined. The Olmec world underwent devastating changes, climatic, political, and spiritual, that could have wiped out schools of artisans and priests. If knowledge existed only through practice, then the cessation of tradition meant an immediate break. Some archaeologists propose a mystical theory. Mirrors were used not only for observation, but also for inner vision, a symbolic journey into another reality. It is believed that the shapes emerging on the surface from the glow of fire served as signs through which priests deciphered the structure of the world. If this is true, the disappearance of mirrors as a tool could have led to the loss of an entire spiritual science based on the interaction of light, minerals, and consciousness. Today, Olmec mirrors are studied with microscopes and laser scanners, but their mystery remains unsolved. We see only traces of a technology they controlled but never revealed. The complexity of their manufacture, the obscure symbolism, and the enigmatic traces of use suggest that we are confronted with fragments of a knowledge system in which optics, ritual, and cosmology were integrated. Mirrors become not just artifacts, but windows into a vanished mentality that once sought to capture the movement of light and time. The lost records of the Minoans. On the island of Crete, amidst endless sea horizons and mountain ranges seemingly designed to hide secrets, existed a civilization whose memory crumbled faster than its stone palaces crumbled under earthquakes. The Minoans left behind frescoes, temples, enigmatic symbols, and the ruins of majestic complexes. But the core of their culture, recorded knowledge, rituals, laws, and observations, has vanished almost completely. This void became one of the deepest historical chasms of the ancient Mediterranean. The primary Minoan script was Linear A, which remains undeciphered. However, archaeologists are convinced that it was only part of a more complex tradition of documents that have not survived. The palaces of Knossos, Phaistos, and Mallia were designed in such a way that they could have housed archives that once occupied dozens of rooms. Remains of shelves, collapsed niches, and charred clay slabs indicate a vast number of texts destroyed by fire and time. But what exactly did they contain? The most detailed evidence comes from parallels with Linear B, later used in Mycenaean Greece, but these are only indirect hints. The Minoans possessed advanced knowledge of astronomy, navigation, hydraulic systems, architecture, and spatial organization. They were masters of complex rituals involving priests, dancers, and individuals who had attained special states of consciousness. All of this required a structured system of knowledge transmission, and this has almost completely disappeared. A popular theory among scholars is that the Minoans used two levels of writing, open and closed. The open system was available to officials, merchants, and artisans, while the closed system belonged to the priestly tradition. Linear A may be just the tip of the iceberg, lacking magical and ritual sections. Researchers have discovered stone vessels carved with symbols that do not belong to any known system. These symbols are found in sanctuaries and associated with ritual objects, suggesting the existence of a sacred script. The Minoans' meticulous spatial arrangement is particularly intriguing. The palace corridors are laid out in a way that creates a labyrinthine effect, perhaps not by accident. Some researchers believe this architecture was part of their intellectual system. The palace may have served not only as an administrative center, but also as a learning structure where students followed specific routes corresponding to ritual and cosmological patterns. If so, the lost inscriptions could have included route plans, descriptions of symbolic directions, and interactions with sacred spaces. Minoan navigation developed to a remarkable level. They traversed the seas using maps that have not survived. Frescoes depicting ships and dolphins are often viewed as decoration, but some experts believe they reflect a complex geographical tradition. Had the archives survived, they could have contained the first maritime charts of Europe, systems for calculating route distances, and methods for navigating using the stars. Their disappearance has deprived us of an understanding of how early humans navigated long distances without obvious instruments. A significant portion of the lost knowledge likely concerned rituals. The Minoans placed great emphasis on interaction with natural forces, especially with the mother deity, whose attributes are found in almost every sanctuary. Rituals associated with bulls, labyrinths, and sacred peaks indicate a highly complex system of beliefs. These rites required precise instructions, sequences of actions, descriptions of offerings, and patterns of movement for the participants. Entire collections of sacred texts may have existed, which disappeared along with the priestly schools. No less mysterious is the Minoans' connection to subterranean spaces. Cretan caves served as ritual centers long before their civilization, and the Minoans continued this tradition. Such places may have housed secret records intended only for the highest initiates. Caves are fire-resistant, but vulnerable to moisture, so organic materials were easily destroyed. The lost texts may have been scrolls or wooden tablets coated with a thin layer of wax. Another trace of lost knowledge is the strange mathematical proportions of the palaces. Corridors, squares, and columns are constructed with rhythms reminiscent of musical intervals. Perhaps the Minoans combined architecture with acoustics, creating spaces designed for specific ritual sounds. If texts about such practices had survived, they could reveal an early harmonic science lost over the centuries. There's also a theory that the records were kept secret politically. The disappearance of the Minoans was accompanied by a period of upheaval, earthquakes, and possibly invasions. During this time, archives could have been deliberately destroyed to conceal administrative methods, temple hierarchy, or the secrets of bronze and dye production. If such documents existed, their destruction could have been an act of self-defense to prevent enemies from exploiting the accumulated knowledge. Finally, there is a mystical hypothesis that the Minoans possessed knowledge of the cycles of earth and sea, a concept preserved in later Hellenic myths. It implies the observation of sea levels, earthquakes, and other natural rhythms. Perhaps their archives contained data collected over many generations. These records could have been part of prophetic practices intended to avert catastrophes. But when the civilization itself collapsed, so did those who could understand the meaning of such texts. The disappearance of Minoan records is more than just a lack of documents. It is the loss of a holistic worldview in which observation, ritual, art, navigation, and architecture formed a unified language. Today, we see only fragments of it, like shards of a mirror that has lost its reflection. But each fragment reveals the presence of vast lost knowledge that could have transformed our understanding of the ancient world. The undeciphered Vinca Code. On the banks of the Danube, among the gentle hills of the Balkans, more than 7 millennia ago, a culture emerged whose traces still intrigue archaeologists and scholars of ancient writing. This is the Vinca culture, an enigmatic Neolithic civilization that left behind ceramic figurines, elaborately decorated vessels, and a multitude of symbols unlike any known writing system. These symbols, appearing on amulets, tablets, and ritual objects, form what many call the Vinca Code, one of the world's most ancient undeciphered scripts. The Vinca symbols are remarkably diverse, from simple geometric lines to complex intersections and figures reminiscent of schematic representations of animals, plants, or abstract entities. But most importantly, they are repeated with such frequency and in such combinations that chance is ruled out. These signs seem to describe the structure of thoughts, cosmological concepts, and social rituals. But their precise meaning is unknown, as the culture disappeared long before the first texts of the Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations appeared. Many researchers have attempted to decipher the Vinca Code, but each hypothesis has encountered insurmountable difficulties. Some consider the signs to be proto-writing, a system of symbols used to represent simple concepts. Others believe it to be a fully fledged writing system, reflecting complex ideas and ritual instructions. However, the lack of long texts complicates any attempt at reconstruction. The Vinca left behind only short lines and single signs, as if deliberately avoiding lengthy records. Perhaps knowledge was transmitted primarily orally, and the symbols served merely as keys to memory. The context in which these signs were discovered presents a particular mystery. Most of the symbols are found on ritual objects, goddess figurines, incense burners, and sacred vessels. This suggests a possible connection between writing and religious matters. If the Vinca Code was truly part of spiritual practices, it could have contained descriptions of rituals, prayers, or formulas intended only for trusted priests. In this case, writing was not a means of communication, but a tool for preserving sacred secrets. However, there are also signs found on household objects, for example, clay tablets that could have been used for resource accounting. This suggests that writing may have served multiple purposes, practical and ritual. In this case, the Vinca Code could have been the first universal system of knowledge transmission, connecting the sacred and the mundane. But if so, why is its structure so mysterious? Some researchers suggest that the Vinca signs may have reflected astronomical observations. Drawings reminiscent of star diagrams or lunar phases are common enough to be considered part of a calendrical system. Perhaps the Vincha culture had early knowledge of the movements of celestial bodies, capturing them in symbols understandable only to initiates. Certain combinations of signs form series resembling cycles, supporting this hypothesis. But there are also more unusual theories. Some scholars believe the Vincha code could have been a system for classifying the world, similar to early natural science. The symbols could have represented elements, life forms, types of energy, or interactions. If this theory is correct, then the Vincha possessed a remarkably complex model of reality, based not on myths, but on the observation and ordering of nature. In this case, the disappearance of the culture signifies the loss of an early form of scientific thinking. The level of craftsmanship at Vincha is no less astonishing than their writing. Their ceramics are distinguished by their fine craftsmanship, and the geometric precision of their ornamentation suggests a sophisticated measurement system. This also supports the idea of a sophisticated form of education. If writing was part of this system, it was likely used to transmit technical knowledge, for example, vessel-making techniques, firing methods, or dye recipes. However, since no clear technological texts have been found, this remains speculative. The question of why the Vincha script disappeared remains open. Perhaps the culture was disrupted by the migration of new peoples who brought a different tradition. Perhaps its disappearance was due to climate change, which destroyed the economic system. If the script was closely tied to a specific way of life and rituals, its disappearance could have occurred along with the collapse of the social structure. Without priests, craftsmen, and guardians, the symbols lost their meaning and were no longer transmitted. Some archaeologists offer a mystical interpretation. The Vincha code was not simply a system of symbols, but a form of interaction with the world. It served to record energetic or spiritual flows that, according to belief, influenced the life of the community. Symbols could have been ways to anchor beneficial forces or protect against destructive ones. If so, then writing disappeared not by chance, but because at some point its power no longer matched people's needs. Modern technology allows us to analyze signs more precisely. Computer algorithms identify recurring structures that indicate grammar or syntax. But even if these efforts help reconstruct the system, the meaning remains inaccessible without the cultural context, which is forever lost. We can see the form, but not the content. The Vincha code remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Neolithic. It is a gateway to a lost realm of knowledge, where symbols were not just images, but keys to understanding the world. This vanished culture left us only fragments of its language, but each fragment reveals the presence of a coherent system built on observation, ritual, and mystery. While the writing remains undecipherable, it reminds us how easily the earliest forms of wisdom are lost, and how deeply the origins of human knowledge lie hidden in the past. The mystery of the Sumerian star lists. On the plains of ancient Mesopotamia, where the sound of the wind seems to echo the first cities, a civilization arose that left behind an immeasurably rich legacy of texts. But among the tablets of administration, hymns to the gods, and royal chronicles, there are documents that stand out for their particular depth. These are star lists, fragments of an ancient astronomical tradition which the Sumerians began long before the formation of fully fledged scientific schools. However, most of these lists have disappeared, and only rare copies allow us to appreciate the scale of the lost knowledge. The Sumerians developed an observational system of astonishing precision. They recorded the appearance and disappearance of stars, the movements of planets, and records of anomalous celestial events and rare cycles. But the main mystery is that many of these records describe events that are impossible to observe with the naked eye, or that occur too rarely to be recorded by observers within a single generation. This leads researchers to believe that the Sumerian astronomical tradition was much older than the cities of Uruk and Eridu themselves. One of the most enigmatic texts is considered the so-called List of Wandering Lights, which mentions 7 luminaries whose paths were carefully traced. Some luminaries are described with unusual characteristics, as if they were temporary phenomena or flashes in the sky. But what actually lay behind these descriptions, comets, rare stars, or lost astronomical observations, remains unknown. Remarkably, later copyists attempted to preserve the list's form, despite clearly not understanding its contents. There's a document known as the List of Silent Stars. It lists points in the night sky that show no visible change. The Sumerians considered them symbols of the stability of the universe. However, the odd thing is that some of the names of these silent stars are not found anywhere else, and their locations cannot be precisely determined. Researchers speculate that these points may have been special astronomical landmarks used in the construction of temple complexes. A more intriguing theory is that the Sumerian star lists may have incorporated knowledge from previous cultures. According to legend, sages who lived before the flood, a mythical event mentioned in Sumerian and other Middle Eastern traditions, possessed technologies that allowed them to observe celestial phenomena over long periods. Perhaps the Sumerians inherited some of this information, transforming it into lists whose meaning was lost along with the original tradition. This would also explain the astronomical accuracy of some of the data. Of particular interest are the lists devoted to the movements of Venus. The Sumerians monitored this planet so meticulously that even late Babylonian astronomers could not surpass their early observations. However, only a fraction of these documents have survived. It is believed that the Sumerians used sophisticated methods for calculating Venus's cycles, possibly including predicting its anomalies. But if such methods existed, they must have relied on profound mathematical knowledge. The disappearance of this knowledge speaks to the collapse of an entire intellectual school. Even more mysterious are the lists containing dates that don't match the known calendars of Mesopotamia. These dates form sequences that remain undeciphered. Some researchers suggest they are linked to precessional cycles, the slow shift in the position of the Earth's axis, a phenomenon officially recognized only thousands of years later. If the Sumerians possessed such a concept, it would indicate a completely different depth to their astronomy. A mystical undertone is also added by the fact that star lists were used not only for observation, but also in rituals. Some priests believed that the stars were the writings of the gods, and that their every change reflected events in the human world. Perhaps the lists were compiled not simply as scientific tables, but as an attempt to understand the cycles of fate. In this case, the lost documents could have contained information about the interaction between celestial and terrestrial time, information that later eras were unable to reproduce. Sumerian temples were built with stellar alignments in mind. In Ur, Nippur, and other centers, priests may have used star lists as a guide for determining sacred axes. Calculating precise angles required complex calculations. A significant portion of these calculations are now lost. The tablets have either been destroyed or have ended up in private collections, where scholars have no access. Some researchers believe the lists contained information about rare celestial phenomena, supernovae, large comets, and unusual planetary conjunctions. If so, the Sumerians may have become the first historians of cosmic catastrophes. However, since many of the lists have disappeared, we do not know what events they recorded. Perhaps they were the source of the earliest myths about celestial battles and stellar wars, which later permeated Mesopotamian literature. One of the most troubling mysteries remains the disappearance of these lists. Some speculate that the tablets were destroyed during conquests and fires. Others believe that the priests themselves concealed dangerous knowledge. Several texts hint at the existence of forbidden lists, accessible only to a select few. These allegedly contained information capable of influencing the fate of cities. If such documents truly existed, their loss would mark the disappearance of a key part of the Sumerian intellectual tradition. Modern researchers are attempting to reconstruct fragments of star lists from copies from later eras. but each discovered fragment raises more questions than answers. Why did the Sumerians pay so much attention to the stars? Which cycles were most important to them? And most importantly, what exactly did we lose with the disappearance of their astronomical archives? The Sumerian star lists are a bridge between scientific observation and a mythological perception of the world. They reflect an early civilization's attempt to understand the cosmos as a structure governed by laws and rhythms. The vanished lists left a gaping void in which we sense the presence of subtle fragments of early science. They remind us that the origins of astronomy may be much deeper and more ancient than is commonly believed. Lost treatises of Ptolemy. When Ptolemy's name appears in textbooks, it's most often in reference to the creator of the geocentric model of the world, a thinker whose works became the foundation of science for subsequent eras. However, few consider that Ptolemy's surviving books represent only a fraction of a much larger legacy. Many treatises mentioned by the author himself or by later commentators have disappeared without a trace. These lost texts likely contained ideas that could have changed the development of astronomy, geography, mathematics, and even the early natural sciences. Scholars have long noted that the structure of Ptolemy's surviving works suggests the presence of other books missing from modern collections. For example, in the Almagest, he references previous studies on planetary motion, but not a single book containing these calculations in their original form has been found. The question is, were these texts destroyed, lost accidentally, or intentionally concealed? The answer remains uncertain, but numerous pieces of evidence suggest that Ptolemy's legacy was much broader. One of the most mysterious lost works is a treatise on observational methods. Ptolemy mentions special instruments he used in his research, devices for measuring angles, complex systems for determining tilts, and an instrument called a triangular reflector. Some believe it may have been an early version of a sextant or astrolabe. If this text had survived, it could have shed light on the technological level of astronomical laboratories of the era. But it has not, and many details remain mere conjecture. Another group of lost works is related to cartography. Ptolemy is famous for his world maps, but surviving versions of them are often incomplete and based on later retellings. Some sources claim that there was a treatise devoted to measuring distances using celestial coordinates. This could indicate an early understanding of geodesy, based not only on terrestrial measurements, but also on astronomical calculations. The loss of such a text means the loss of a crucial link between ancient and late antique knowledge. No less interesting is the mythical treatise on spheres of influence. Later alchemists and astrologers, citing Ptolemy, claimed that he developed a system of interactions between celestial bodies that included not only mechanical but also energetic aspects. If such a work truly existed, it could have combined early physics, philosophy, and elements of mystical knowledge. However, there is no direct evidence of this. It is possible that the treatise was destroyed during the era of suppression of occult texts. Some ancient manuscripts also mention a work on light deflections, which was associated with optics. Ptolemy studied the refraction of light, and the fragments of his optical experiments that have survived demonstrate astonishing precision. But if a more complete treatise existed containing a theory of reflection, lens construction, or research into the properties of mirrors, then we are dealing with a lost section of ancient physics that could have changed our understanding of the capabilities of ancient science. Of particular intrigue are the texts Ptolemy may have written late in his life, when his interests shifted from astronomy to mathematics and harmony. He is believed to have been working on a treatise on the connection between the movements of the heavens and musical intervals. This field, harmonica, was already known to the Pythagoreans, but Ptolemy may have given it a rigorous form, combining observations and calculations. The loss of such a text signifies the disappearance of a rare attempt at synthesizing science and art. Researchers also point to a mysterious reference to tables of deviations related to planetary motion. These tables may have been intermediate calculations preceding the Almagest. Their loss complicates our understanding of Ptolemy's methodology and how he arrived at his system. It's possible that these tables preserved information about alternative models he considered but rejected. The disappearance of these materials leaves the picture of his scientific process incomplete. There's also a mystical version of the lost treatises. Some late Arab authors claim that Ptolemy possessed the secrets of secret geometry, a system describing not only physical space, but also the hidden structures of reality. They spoke of figures that had the ability to alter the observer's perception, and of calculations that could predict changes in light. But evidence for this version is scant, and scholars are cautious. Nevertheless, the disappearance of a large volume of Ptolemaic literature creates the feeling that we are seeing only the tip of a gigantic iceberg. Perhaps his ideas about the motion of celestial bodies were far more complex than the accepted system suggests. Some researchers point to discrepancies between his calculations and later models that cannot be explained by a simple error. This hints at the existence of additional layers of analysis reflected in the lost material. The reasons for the disappearance of these treatises are manifold. Some may have been destroyed in the fires of the Library of Alexandria, others were lost during translations and copying. Some texts may have been deemed unnecessary or incompatible with later philosophical schools. Others, conversely, may have been hidden to avoid religious criticism. But the reality is that we will never know how many ideas about astronomy, optics, music, and mathematics were lost. Today, studying Ptolemy involves not only working with surviving texts, but also searching for what's missing. Researchers analyze references, compare fragments, and attempt to reconstruct the structure of lost works. But each attempt only deepens the sense of the gulf between what we know and what might have been. The loss of Ptolemy's treatises is more than just a gap in the history of science. It is the disappearance of an entire branch of the human quest to understand the world through numbers, movement, and light. We stand before this vanished heritage as we do before the empty niches of ancient temples, feeling the power of what was but can no longer be restored. And in the silence of this loss, only a quiet hint remains. The world was once understood differently, more deeply and accurately than we can imagine now. Astronomy of Nabta-Playa. On the edge of Egypt's western desert, where the wind blows sand as impassively as it did thousands of years ago, lies one of the most enigmatic places in ancient Africa, Nabta-Playa. Today, this dry lake bed, surrounded by dunes and rock ridges, appears deserted and silent. But hidden within this silence lies a history that upends our conventional understanding of the development of ancient knowledge. Here, among crude stone circles and precisely constructed lines, once existed a school of observers whose astronomical discoveries were lost long before the first kingdoms of the Nile Valley arose. The structures discovered here are striking in their precision. The stone circles of Nabta-Playa are aligned with key astronomical events: the summer solstice, the appearance of certain star constellations, and moments associated with the cycles of Sirius. It is precisely the alignment with Sirius that has become the main subject of debate, as it requires long-term observations and complex calculations. To determine the cycle's recurrence, observers required decades of continuous recording. But the inhabitants of Nabta-Playa had no written language. This means they relied on oral methods and architecture as memory tools. Some researchers believe the stone circles were ancient observatories that functioned like a calendar. Certain stone gates marked the points on the horizon where the sun rose or set at key times of the year. However, further study revealed a far more complex structure. Some stones are aligned with points related not to the sun, but to the movement of the stars. This discovery has led to the hypothesis that early celestial navigation existed at Nabta-Playa long before the advent of advanced civilizations. A particularly puzzling feature is the fact that some structures were constructed using symmetry, which could have reflected cosmological ideas. If one views the layout of certain circles from above, one can see figures reminiscent of schematic constellations. This may have been a form of knowledge transfer, symbolic models of celestial groups used in training young observers. Such models could have served as a kind of memory card, allowing information to be retained without the need for written records. But how could a culture without writing or complex architecture create such precise landmarks? Research has shown that the inhabitants of Nabta Playa used astronomy to regulate vital processes, such as timing migrations, the onset of the rainy season, and preparing for droughts. Stargazing wasn't abstract, it was part of survival. But over time, this practical foundation evolved into an entire tradition based on a grid of celestial cycles. Some scholars suggest that the inhabitants of Nabta Playa possessed early forms of mathematical concepts. The arrangement of the stones reveals a deliberate proportionality linked to the angular relationships of celestial bodies. These proportions could have served as a kind of formula, memorized through shapes and distances. In this case, the stones were not simply landmarks, but a three-dimensional book encoding astronomical principles. No less intriguing is the hypothesis about the migration of this knowledge. According to some researchers, the Nabta Playa traditions may have formed the basis of early Egyptian astronomy. Population movements following climate change could have led to the transmission of oral knowledge to the Nile Valley. Traces of similar ideas are visible in the rituals of ancient Egypt, where Sirius played a key role. But if this connection did exist, it was lost long before the first written records appeared. There's a more ambitious theory. Nabta Playa was the center of a complex cosmological school that not only observed the stars, but also correlated them with the rhythms of the Earth. The stone circles may have been not only measuring instruments, but also symbols of the interaction between celestial and terrestrial cycles. The observing priests may have believed that the world existed thanks to the harmony between the movement of the stars and the changing seasons. Their task was not simply to observe, but also to maintain this harmony through rituals and construction. Over time, the region's climate changed, the lake dried up, and the inhabitants were forced to abandon this center of knowledge. The structures left behind were forgotten, and the oral tradition disappeared or was transformed. What remains are mere stone traces, unable to convey the complexity of the systems they encoded. But it is precisely this lack of written sources that makes Nabta Playa one of the most enigmatic astronomical cultures of antiquity. Today, researchers are using computer modeling to reconstruct the celestial cycles observed during the era of Nabta Playa. The models show that the orientation of the stones precisely corresponds to the position of Sirius and certain stellar structures that existed approximately 6,000 years ago. But the question remains, how deeply did the inhabitants understand these patterns? Were they relying on chance connections, or did they possess a systematic knowledge that disappeared along with their culture? Some archaeologists speculate that Nabta Playa wasn't the only astronomical center in the region. Perhaps there was a network of similar sites linked by a single calendar. If so, the lost tradition was much more widespread than previously thought. However, since no written records survive, these ideas remain speculative. A mystical shadow is cast on the research by the fact that some stones appear to have been selected for specific properties: density, color, or light-reflecting properties. If this was a deliberate choice, it could indicate the stone's use in nocturnal observations or even rituals associated with celestial cycles. Perhaps the priests believed the stones conveyed celestial energy. Today, Nabta Playa is more than just an archaeological site. It's a question with no answers. Why did this culture disappear? Where did its knowledge go? Why did such a precise system of astronomy leave no written traces? The answers lie in the rocks and sand that cover the land, once filled with water and life. The vanished astronomy of Nabta Playa reminds us that humanity's first steps toward cosmic exploration were taken not by those who possessed writing, but by those who looked at the stars and saw in them a language accessible only to the attentive. The Lost Books of Qumran, the dry hills of the Judean desert, cut by deep crevices and the gray lines of ancient trails, conceal a secret that still compels scholars and researchers to delve into the silence of the past. Qumran, the site where the famous Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, represents only a fragment of a vast spiritual and intellectual heritage. Just as important as the texts found is what was not found, the lost books, references to which are scattered among the surviving fragments and traditions. The community living at Qumran developed a complex tradition of recording and preserving sacred texts. Their library was likely one of the most systematic in the Middle East at the time. But the manuscripts discovered in the caves represent only a fraction of the body of knowledge that existed during the community's heyday. Many texts refer to other books, unfound, vanished, or lost in the storms of history. This raises the question, what did these books contain, and why did they disappear? Some fragments point to a Book of Times, a document describing the sequence of world ages. It presumably included both historical information and prophetic elements, based on a complex system of calculations. Researchers believe this text may have represented a unique combination of calendrical science, astronomy, and theology. If it had survived, it could have revealed the logic by which the Qumran community determined fateful events. There are also references to the Book of Sacred Measurements, a text that linked ritual structures to celestial coordinates. This book may have included information on temple construction, the orientation of altars, and the interaction of sacred architecture with the movements of celestial bodies. The Qumranites may have inherited this tradition from earlier cultures for whom the connection between earth and heaven was crucial. The disappearance of such a text hinders our understanding of their cosmological concepts. No less mysterious are references to the Book of Hidden Fates. It likely contained secret teachings on the nature of the human soul, the struggle between the forces of light and darkness, and the purpose of the community in the context of world history. Such texts would have been accessible only to initiates, and their loss could be explained by deliberate destruction during times of crisis or persecution. If this text truly existed, it could have contained one of the earliest systems of spiritual anthropology. Legends about the Book of the Heavenly Guardians occupy a special place. Some fragments of the Qumran texts describe entities monitoring the world's order and intervening when it is disrupted. These ideas echo ancient Near Eastern myths and later religious teachings. Researchers suggest that the lost book contained an early version of the doctrine of celestial hierarchy, which later became part of broader religious traditions. Its disappearance leaves a gaping void in the history of religious ideas. The most important problem is that all these books could have been destroyed or lost during the destruction of Qumran. When Roman troops invaded the Dead Sea region, the community was forced to hide its scrolls, concealing them in caves. But not all of them were hidden. Some texts could have been burned, others carried away to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. It's possible that some texts were destroyed by the Qumranites themselves, who, in the community's final days, considered their knowledge too sacred to impart to the uninitiated. There's another, more mystical version. Some scholars believe that some of the Qumran teachings were transmitted orally and deliberately not written down. In this case, the missing books may not have been physical texts, but rather lost traditions that existed only through teaching. However, the discovered scrolls contain hints of specific documents, making this version only a partial explanation. A separate mystery arises from the library's systematization. The texts discovered include distinct groups, sacred documents, commentaries, community rules, prophetic texts, and hymns. This indicates the existence of a sophisticated library catalog. If such catalogs did exist, they would have referenced dozens of books missing from the finds. Some fragments bear numbers that do not correspond to any surviving texts, suggesting that the Qumran library was much more extensive. Some researchers believe that some of the lost texts were related to ancient scientific knowledge. For example, there are hints of a system for determining the timing of agricultural work based on star observations. If such a text existed, it could have contained a unique combination of astronomy and agronomy. Other references hint at knowledge of healing herbs and minerals. It's possible the Qumranites possessed an extensive medical tradition that disappeared along with the texts. But perhaps the most intriguing question is whether the lost texts included scrolls containing alternative versions of well-known sacred books. Some fragments indicate that the Qumranites rewrote and interpreted ancient traditions in their own way. If they had their own versions of these texts, their disappearance signifies the loss of an entire layer of spiritual history, one that could change our understanding of the development of religious thought. Modern researchers are using new technologies to search for hidden traces of vanished books. Spectral analysis reveals glimpses of inscriptions in seemingly blank fragments. Computer models attempt to reconstruct lost parts of the library by comparing recovered fragments with quotations and references. But no matter how many technologies are employed, the fundamental question remains: what was in these books, and why have they not survived? The lost books of Qumran are more than just lost texts. They represent a vanished tradition of understanding the world in which calendar, ritual, prophecy, and philosophy existed as a unified whole. The silence of these books reminds us that the history of knowledge is uneven. Some civilizations leave behind riches, while others leave only hints that spark the imagination. And it is these hints that compel us to search for answers in the darkness, where the light of vanished wisdom once shone. Secrets of Harappan metallurgy. On the plains of the ancient Indus Valley, where seasonal rivers roared for centuries and cities built according to strict geometric patterns arose, existed a civilization whose achievements continue to astound researchers. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are two centers of a culture distinguished by a sophisticated administrative system, remarkable standardization of measures, and a sophisticated urban infrastructure. But among their many achievements, metallurgy stands out, a field of knowledge that has almost completely disappeared, yet left traces that hint at the existence of technologies ahead of their time. The Harappans possessed a profound understanding of metals, their properties, processing, and smelting techniques. Archaeologists have uncovered objects made of copper, bronze, and lead, sometimes with mysterious compositions that cannot be explained by simple smelting methods. Remarkably, most of these objects were crafted with astonishing precision, from fine needles to complex tools. However, written evidence of these technologies is lacking, and the production methods themselves remain a mystery. This begs the question: how did such an early civilization achieve such a level of mastery? Harappan copper is particularly noteworthy. It is distinguished by its unusual purity, requiring complex purification techniques such as repeated calcination and filtration, unknown to most ancient cultures. Some samples contain a combination of elements that indicates controlled alloying, a process in which metal is given the desired properties by adding other substances. However, this level of control requires not only experience, but also a theoretical understanding of the processes. Since the Harappan writing system has yet to be deciphered, it is unknown whether they had specialized treatises on metallurgy or whether their knowledge was transmitted orally. Harappan bronze remains another mystery. It is distinguished by its exceptional strength and durability. Some archaeologists believe the Harappans mastered a method of repeated forging, which increased the density of the material. Others suggest the use of specialized furnaces capable of achieving high temperatures. However, traces of such furnaces have not been found in sufficient numbers. Perhaps the Harappans used portable furnaces or kilns, which have left minimal archaeological evidence. Equally intriguing is the fact that many metal objects are found in sites clearly associated with rituals. This suggests that metallurgy may have played a role not only in crafts, but also in spiritual practices. Some figurines found in temples or sanctuaries contain metal inlays, suggesting they were used in rites of passage or purification. In some cultures, metal was considered a material linking the earthly and the heavenly. Perhaps the Harappans viewed metals not only as tools, but also as entities with special powers. There is evidence that the Harappans worked with metal at a level that could be called scientific. They used standardized weights and measures, suggesting the existence of a quality control system. Moreover, some finds indicate that metallurgical workshops were located in designated city blocks, suggesting centralized production management. But how did this system work? Who controlled the metallurgical processes? Were they priests, craftsmen, or a separate group of knowledge keepers? Another mystery is the sources of the ores. The Harappans mined metal in regions located considerable distances from their cities. This required the development of trade and transport, as well as a knowledge of geology. Some archaeologists speculate that the Harappans had maps of the deposits, passed down from generation to generation. However, not a single map has been found. It's quite possible that such knowledge was preserved through oral tradition or on tablets, whose written language remains undecipherable. Mysterious metal objects occasionally found in excavations suggest that the Harappans experimented with form and function. Some objects resemble tools that cannot be classified as belonging to any known type. These may have been specialized devices for smelting or shaping metals. However, there are even more daring theories. Some of these objects may have been parts of early scientific instruments used for measurements or observations. However, without texts, it is impossible to understand exactly how they were used. Particularly noteworthy are the rare finds of alloys with high contents of tin, arsenide, and other elements. These compositions indicate a profound understanding of chemical processes. In some samples, the concentrations of elements are so precise that they are difficult to explain by chance. Perhaps the Harappan masters mastered methods that we today call early chemistry. This suggests the existence of specialized metallurgy schools whose students underwent lengthy training and practical experience. But all these schools disappeared along with the civilization. Why did Harappan knowledge disappear? One of the leading theories relates to climate change. The disappearance of rivers and salinization of soils led to the decline of cities. When people abandoned their centers, oral traditions likely ceased. Craftsmen may have carried their knowledge to other regions, but their craftsmanship may have become unsophisticated after a few generations. Furthermore, the collapse of social structures and the centralization of production meant the loss of the standardization methods that had been an important part of their system. There's also a mystical theory that metallurgy was not just a craft, but a sacred practice, requiring ritual purity and special conditions. When the temples and priestly centers disappeared, so did the tradition that sustained the knowledge. In this case, Harappan metallurgy may have been lost not because it was forgotten, but because it ceased to be possible. Modern research continues to uncover new facts, but with each discovered specimen, it becomes clear we understand only a small part of what the Harappans knew. Their metallurgy was a science, an art, and a mystery all at once. The loss of this tradition is one of the most profound disappearances of ancient knowledge, one that continues to challenge our understanding of the past. Forgotten formulas of Egypt. Egypt, a land of solar horizons and stone giants, has always seemed a realm of unchanging wisdom. But behind the marble stillness of the pyramids and the grandeur of the temples lies a lost layer of knowledge, hardly inferior in significance to the famous mathematics of the Nile or the cosmology of the priests of Heliopolis. Among papyrus fragments, wall fragments, and allusions in ritual texts, researchers are discovering traces of what are called the forgotten formulas of Egypt, a system of knowledge that united measurement, proportion, energy, and sacred geometry. Most surviving documents are devoted to economic management, rituals, astronomy, and medicine. But some fragments, especially those preserved in temple workshops, contain references to mysterious calculations. These references include forms of light, numbers of breath, and the measure of 2 horizons. What exactly the ancient priests meant by this remains unclear. However, numerous observations of temple and pyramid architecture indicate that the Egyptians possessed a complex system of calculations based on proportions that cannot be explained solely by practical purposes. One of the mysteries is the mathematical relationships at the base of the Great Pyramid. Researchers have long noted that its proportions are linked to relationships close to pi and the golden ratio. Although modern scholars debate whether the Egyptians were consciously aware of such constants, there is indirect evidence that they used a special system to achieve harmony between length, height, and angles. This system could have been part of a lost tradition of formulas used not only in construction but also in rituals. Of particular interest is the concept that later texts call the Ka measure. Ka is the vital essence of a person, but the term also appears in descriptions of buildings, tools, and sacred statues. Some researchers suggest that this refers to an ancient system of energetic or vibrational characteristics inherent in objects. If so, the Egyptians may have used formulas defining the interaction of the material and the immaterial. The proportions of buildings, the placement of columns, and the rhythm of ritual halls may have followed these formulas. But the most intriguing traces of forgotten formulas are found in medical texts. Egyptian medicine is renowned for its practicality, numerous recipes, descriptions of herbs, and procedures. However, some papyri contain references to numbers, structures, and calculations not directly related to treatment. For example, there are diagrams reminiscent of body cartography, where dots are connected by lines forming geometric shapes. Perhaps this is an early understanding of energy flows, later developed by other cultures. If so, then the Egyptians had formulas explaining the interactions of organs, respiration, and heart rhythms. It is hypothesized that the Egyptians possessed a unique form of acoustic calculation. Some temples and rooms in the pyramids possess unique resonant properties. At certain points in the structure, sound is amplified or directed in a specific way. This cannot be explained by chance. Perhaps the priests used formulas describing the behavior of sound in a confined space. This knowledge could have served not only for rituals, but also as part of the training of priestly schools, where voice and vibrations held particular significance. There is also mention of a mysterious measure of 2 horizons, which some researchers believe may relate to the movement of the sun and the connection between terrestrial and celestial structures. Perhaps this formula determined how to construct buildings so that they would reflect light in a specific way at key moments of the year. Some temples are indeed oriented so that the sun's rays illuminate specific reliefs or statues on specific days. This precision suggests the existence of a method that we cannot yet reconstruct. Another area of forgotten formulas is working with minerals. The Egyptians used stone and metal not only for construction and decoration, but also to create tools and ritual objects. Some objects possess properties that cannot be explained by conventional processing methods. For example, some altars contain stone slabs capable of reflecting or amplifying light. Perhaps the Egyptians utilized knowledge of the physical properties of materials recorded in formulas that have not survived. Some see a connection between the cryptic references to the breath number and rituals of animating statues and figures. These rituals involved complex sequences of actions and may have employed mathematical principles. Perhaps the breath number described the interaction of rhythms, gestures, and directions. If such formulas existed, they were part of a sacred practice, hidden from the uninitiated and transmitted only within priestly schools. The forgotten formulas of Egypt were likely not recorded in any written language available to us. The Egyptians used hieratic and demotic scripts for everyday matters, but sacred knowledge could have been transmitted orally. This explains why key formulas disappeared. When the temples lost their power and the priestly schools ceased to exist, oral traditions ceased. There are occasional accounts of hidden books, documents supposedly kept in secret rooms of temples. However, not a single such book has ever been found. Today, researchers continue to study architecture, texts, and artifacts, attempting to identify patterns that point to the existence of formulas. Mathematicians, physicists, and engineers contribute to this research, analyzing the angles, proportions, and acoustics of temples. Each discovery raises new questions. What principles did the Egyptians use? How deeply did they understand mathematics? Were their formulas simple practical instructions or part of a philosophical system describing the structure of the world? The mystical shadow of these vanished formulas also lies in the fact that the Egyptians perceived numbers as entities possessing their own power. In their worldview, mathematics was not an abstract discipline, but a tool for interacting with the world. If the formulas reflected not only calculations, but also ritual meanings, then their loss signifies the disappearance of an entire layer of spiritual science. We see only traces of this system, the proportions of the pyramids, the resonance of temples, and strange numerical series in papyri. The forgotten formulas of Egypt are the voice of ancient wisdom, barely audible through the noise of time. We stand before a mystery that unites mathematics, architecture, medicine, and spirituality. And as long as this mystery remains unsolved, Egypt remains a land where numbers, shapes, and light hold a secret no one can decipher. The lost records of Tiahuanaco. On the high plateau of the Altiplano, amid the cold winds blowing from the Andes, rise the ruins of Tiahuanaco, a city long since transformed into a symbol of ancient wisdom and lost knowledge. Majestic monoliths, geometric gates, and perfectly fitted stone blocks all indicate a level of engineering and spiritual development surpassing many cultures of its time. But behind this stone harmony lies a far deeper mystery, a vanished written and scientific tradition, traces of which are scattered among the reliefs, architecture, and legends. Scholars have long debated whether Tiwanaku had its own writing system. Although no clear system of symbols has been found on the stones, some reliefs indicate the presence of a symbolic form of writing intended not for everyday use, but for preserving sacred knowledge. These symbols are found on columns, altars, and especially frequently in the area of the Gate of the Sun, one of the most enigmatic monoliths in South America. The relief on the gate is a complex composition of figures and geometric elements that may be part of a calendar system or a cosmological diagram. According to one hypothesis, the people of Tiwanaku used wooden or fabric storage media, similar to the Inca quipus or the knotting systems of other Andean peoples. However, such materials are poorly preserved in the harsh conditions of time. Perhaps the lost records were part of temple archives, where priests recorded natural cycles, the history of dynasties, knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and rituals. The disappearance of these archives after the fall of the city left a huge gap that no one has been able to fill. The possible astronomical tradition of Tiwanaku has attracted particular attention from researchers. Many structures are oriented along celestial lines. Some stone platforms are positioned so that their corners point to key points of the solstices and equinoxes. But there are also more mysterious landmarks tied to the positions of certain stars and constellations. If the inhabitants of Tiwanaku truly observed the movements of celestial bodies, they may have possessed a developed calendar system that has not been preserved in tangible form. The Gate of the Sun is undoubtedly the key to understanding a forgotten tradition. The central figure, surrounded by rows of symbols, invites numerous interpretations. Some believe it depicts the god Viracocha, the creator of the world. Others believe it is a fragment of a calendar, depicting the cycles of time as repeating symbols. Researchers point out that the composition resembles a diagram depicting complex periodic processes. If so, the lost writing system may have included a system of symbols describing the cycles of natural and cosmic phenomena. It is hypothesized that the inhabitants of Tiwanaku possessed knowledge of the movements of Saturn or other distant planets. Some symbols on gates and altars are interpreted as depictions of the phases of celestial bodies, which are difficult to observe without special conditions. This raises the question, could they have used specialized instruments, similar to primitive observatories? In some platforms, depressions have indeed been discovered that could have served as observation points for solar shadows or reflected light. In addition to astronomy, the lost records of Tiwanaku may have included knowledge of hydraulic engineering. The city was connected to a complex system of canals, reservoirs, and drainage structures. These structures likely required strict monitoring and recording. Documents may have existed describing the plateau's water balance, the seasonal fluctuations in the level of Lake Titicaca, and methods for adapting architecture to climatic conditions. Because such texts have not survived, many of Tiwanaku's engineering solutions remain unclear. Some researchers believe that the Tiwanakus possessed a form of medical knowledge. Archaeologists have found evidence of fracture treatments, surgical interventions, and the use of natural remedies. If these methods were transmitted in writing, the lost records could have contained a rich tradition of medical recipes and descriptions of procedures. Given their proximity to the plant resources of the Andes, the Tiwanakus likely knew a wide variety of medicinal plants and their combinations. But especially intriguing is the hypothesis that Tiwanaku was a center of spiritual science. Stone courtyards, resonant halls, and the unique acoustics of some rooms indicate the use of sound in rituals. If texts describing the connection between sound, breathing, and cosmic cycles existed, they could have represented a unique form of spiritual practice. Researchers have found traces of rhythmic patterns on the walls, which could have been part of a musical notation or even an early form of psychoacoustic techniques. Tiwanaku traditions likely also included encoding knowledge in the patterns of clothing and jewelry. Some patterns are deliberately repeated and may serve as visual records. These patterns may have been part of a system in which each element symbolized a specific natural phenomenon, season, or spiritual concept. The loss of textiles has deprived us of access to this aspect of their culture. The reasons for the disappearance of the Tiwanaku records remain unclear. Some believe the information carriers were destroyed by climatic catastrophes or invasions. Others suggest that the knowledge was transmitted orally and was lost after the destruction of the priestly centers. A more mystical theory also exists. Some texts were deliberately hidden to prevent their misuse. Legends speak of secret repositories where sacred records were kept. However, the search for such repositories has so far been unsuccessful. Modern researchers are attempting to reconstruct lost knowledge through the analysis of architecture, ornamentation, astronomical landmarks, and anthropological data. They are studying stone surfaces to find traces of vanished symbols and using computer modeling to reconstruct ancient observations. However, all of these are merely attempts to approximate what was lost. The loss of Tiwanaku writing is more than just the absence of texts. It is the disappearance of an entire intellectual tradition, one in which the world was understood through cycles, forms, and celestial rhythms. Ultimately, Tiwanaku remains a symbol of ancient science, hidden behind layers of time. And until we decipher the meaning of their symbols and find traces of lost archives, the ruins continue to stand as a silent monument to vanished knowledge. knowledge that could have shed light on the earliest stages of human thought, but which has dissolved into the void, leaving us with only a stony shadow of a once great wisdom. Knowledge of the Moche astronomers. On the northern coast of Peru, where the desert meets the ocean, lived a culture whose artistic and engineering achievements still amaze us today. The Moche, a people known for their temple complexes, irrigation systems, and realistic ceramics, also possessed a deep tradition of celestial observation. But no written language has survived, and all we know of their astronomy are shadows of a vanished knowledge revealed in architecture, rituals, and symbols. These glimpses point to the existence of an entire school of observers whose knowledge was lost with the collapse of their civilization. The primary evidence of the Moche's astronomical skills is their temple structures. The temples of the sun and the moon, two majestic platforms rising above the desert, are oriented along the directions associated with the movements of celestial bodies. Researchers have discovered that their axes are aligned so that at the solstices and equinoxes, sunlight would penetrate specific rooms and illuminate ritual images. Such precision is impossible without systematic observations spanning many generations. But architectural orientation is only part of the lost knowledge. The interiors of the temples contain images that may be part of a cosmological system. On the walls, there are scenes depicting beings associated with celestial phenomena. For example, a being with a lunar crown, surrounded by symbols resembling the phases of the month. Perhaps such images served as a kind of visual record of astronomical observations. But since the Moche have no known written language, we can only assume that such scenes reflect the structure of their worldview. There is evidence to suggest that the Moche had a developed calendar system. Their agricultural economy required precise timing of sowing and harvesting. In an environment where climate fluctuations could be devastating, the ability to predict weather changes was vital. Some researchers suggest that Moche astronomers used star and lunar observations not only for calendar calculations, but also to predict natural cycles, such as El Niño, which significantly impacted coastal regions. There is evidence that the Moche may have used special observation points. Elevations and stone platforms have been discovered near some temples, which could have served as vantage points for observing the horizon. From these sites, astronomers could have noted the appearance of certain stars or the moment of moonrise on key days of the year. If they used such observation stations, this suggests the existence of practical astronomy based on regular records, which, however, have not survived. No less mysterious are ceramic images containing sequences of dots, lines, and symbols. Some researchers believe these sequences may have been a system for recording time cycles. They may have served as training aids for priests or artisans, conveying information about the timing of rituals and agricultural work. Such a system could have functioned as a substitute for writing, where knowledge was encoded visually. Ritual played a special role in Moche astronomy. Priests likely conducted observations not only for practical purposes, but also as part of a sacred tradition. Some scenes on pottery depict priests holding objects resembling astronomical instruments, for example, rods or discs that could have been used to measure angles. If such instruments actually existed, they would indicate a sophisticated level of computational astronomy. It is hypothesized that the Moche linked celestial phenomena to mythological cycles. Their art contains numerous images related to the movements of the celestial bodies, from lunar animals to solar beings. These images appear in specific sequences that can be interpreted as symbols of temporal cycles. Priests may have used these visual sequences to explain cosmological principles and to transmit knowledge between generations. However, one of the most intriguing mysteries is the symbols reminiscent of patterns on textiles and ceramics. Some patterns are repeated with such regularity that they can hardly be considered mere decoration. They resemble graphic records, where each element could represent a specific phase of the month, a season, or the position of a star. Researchers suggest that this system may have been part of an oral tradition, where the patterns acted as keys to the memory of specific knowledge. The disappearance of Moche astronomical knowledge is linked to the decline of their civilization caused by natural disasters, social changes, and possibly wars. When temples ceased to function as centers of learning and priests ceased to function as guardians of knowledge, observational traditions were lost. Oral transmissions could have been lost within just a few generations. Since writing in the traditional sense did not exist, the disappearance of temple schools meant the disappearance of the entire scientific tradition. There's a more mysterious theory, that some astronomical knowledge was hidden or encoded in architecture, images, and ritual objects. Such knowledge may have been reserved for a select few. Its loss may mean that the symbols preserved on walls and ceramics are merely the surface of a deeper hidden meaning that can no longer be recovered. Today, archaeologists, anthropologists, and astronomers continue to explore the Moche legacy, attempting to unravel the threads of their cosmology. Using modern technology, they analyze the orientation of temples, compare images with astronomical events, and study repeating patterns. But each new discovery only confirms that the vanished astronomy of the Moche was complex, multi-layered, and closely linked to their spiritual life. We can only guess at the knowledge contained in these lost texts, symbols, and rituals. Perhaps the Moche possessed a unique system for predicting natural phenomena. Perhaps their cosmology included a concept of the interconnectedness of land, sea, and sky. Perhaps they possessed knowledge that could change our understanding of ancient civilizations. But all of this is lost, and only fragments, scattered among ruins and artifacts, remain as a reminder of the existence of a school whose gaze was fixed on the heavens. The mystery of the Celtic priestly schools. In a land where oak groves rustle and mists hang over the hills, there once existed a tradition whose influence was felt throughout Western Europe. Celtic priests, druids, ovats, and bards composed a complex system of spiritual and intellectual education. But unlike many civilizations, they left behind almost no written records. Their schools, considered centers of wisdom, disappeared as quietly as the secrets they guarded. Today, only rare references, archaeological finds, and Roman descriptions allow us to touch the vanished knowledge of these priestly schools. One of the main mysteries is the structure of education. According to ancient authors, the education of a Celtic priest could last 20 years. Such a lengthy process implies the existence of a multi-layered system of knowledge, including philosophy, astronomy, law, medicine, and ritual practice. However, the Druids themselves did not write down their teachings. They believed that writing distorted meaning and that true wisdom was transmitted only orally. It was this commitment to oral tradition that led to the disappearance of their intellectual heritage. Researchers suggest that Celtic priestly schools had a strict hierarchy. Novices studied natural cycles, the basics of star observation, and ritual rhythms. Advanced students studied the art of interpreting signs, the symbolism of plants and animals, healing techniques, and community legal norms. High priests focused on philosophy, the search for harmony between the earthly and celestial worlds, and the performance of rituals that regulated tribal life. This complexity suggests that the lost knowledge was fundamental to Celtic society. One of the most intriguing areas of Celtic wisdom is astronomy. Archaeological excavations reveal that many Celtic structures are aligned with the solstices, equinoxes, and lunar movements. Some megaliths form complex patterns that allow for the calculation of eclipse cycles or the prediction of the onset of seasons. This suggests the existence of a school of observers whose methods were so natural that they required no written record. However, the disappearance of these priestly schools means that we can only guess at the precise astronomical principles they used. No less mysterious is Celtic knowledge of nature. The Druids were considered masters of herbalism and understood the influence of plants on the body and spirit. Their knowledge included complex recipes, methods for preparing infusions, and an understanding of the seasons when plants exhibit their greatest potency. Much of this knowledge disappeared after the destruction of the priestly schools. Some recipes may have been passed on to folk healers, but most systematic knowledge was lost as the Druids eschewed written instructions. Rituals associated with voice and music occupied a special place. Bards, considered part of the priestly class, preserved epic traditions encoded in poetry and song. They could memorize thousands of lines conveying laws, history, and ritual principles. Music played a role not only in the transmission of knowledge, but also in ritual practice. Specific melodies could accompany rites of purification, healing, or transition. Perhaps there existed a system of musical formulas, each corresponding to specific spiritual actions. This tradition disappeared because it was never written down. One of the most enigmatic aspects of Celtic priestly schools is their relationship to geometry and space. Some megalithic structures exhibit a precision that suggests a profound understanding of proportion. It's possible the Druids used geometry for ritual purposes, creating sacred spaces aligned with celestial principles. Some stone circles are positioned to create acoustic effects, suggesting that the Druids may have combined geometry and sound to enhance the impact of their rituals. There are also traces of lost legal knowledge. The Druids acted as judges and guardians of the laws. Legal norms were transmitted orally and included moral, social, and ritual aspects. The disappearance of the priestly schools led to the loss of these norms. Roman authors attempted to record individual elements, but they were fragmentary. This suggests that the Druids possessed a legal system that may have included philosophical and spiritual elements that have not survived to this day. The mystical aspects should not be forgotten either. The Druids may have mastered techniques of meditation, altered states of consciousness, and interaction with nature. Some ritual sites, such as sacred groves, indicate the existence of practices based on the energetic nature of the space. These practices may have included breathing exercises, rhythmic movements, and working with natural elements. The disappearance of these schools led to these methods being lost or surviving only in highly modified forms in folklore. The disappearance of the Celtic priestly schools is linked to broad historical changes. Roman conquests, Christianization, and the destruction of traditional structures led to the disappearance of institutions that supported the transmission of knowledge. When the Druids lost their status, their teachings ceased to be transmitted. Oral tradition proved insufficient to survive centuries of change, and much of the knowledge disappeared within a few generations. Today, researchers are attempting to reconstruct what was lost by analyzing archaeological finds, Roman descriptions, and folklore. They are studying the structure of megaliths, the repeating patterns on the stones, and the connection between sanctuaries and natural cycles. But every reconstruction remains mere speculation. The true depth of Celtic knowledge lies hidden in the silence of time. The mystery of the Celtic priestly schools is a reminder of how fragile a culture based on oral tradition can be. It also demonstrates that knowledge can disappear not because of the loss of texts, but because of the disappearance of the people who carried it. And today, when we gaze upon ancient groves, stone circles, and the ruins of ancient sanctuaries, we sense the presence of vanished wisdom, so close and yet forever inaccessible. The Lost Chronicles of Kush. Along the banks of the Nile, south of Egypt, lies a land that was once the stronghold of one of the most enigmatic civilizations of the ancient world, the Kingdom of Kush. Here, between the desert and the river, cities arose whose pyramids, temples, and fortresses rivaled those of Egypt. But while the architectural legacy of Kush has survived, its intellectual tradition has been almost completely lost. The Lost Chronicles, mentioned in inscriptions and later sources, represent a complex web of mysteries that has entangled scholars, historians, and archaeologists for centuries. Unlike Egypt, where numerous texts have survived, the writing of Kush has survived fragmentarily. The hieroglyphs of the Meroitic Kingdom have been partially deciphered, but a significant portion of their meaning remains elusive. Some texts are written in a language that researchers call Meroitic cursive, but the structure of its grammar remains unclear. This means that even the surviving documents remain partially obscured. Meanwhile, chronicles, texts that systematically recorded history, rituals, political events, and knowledge, have almost completely disappeared. References to books of the ancestors used by priests and kings have been preserved on the walls of Kush temples. These books likely contained records of dynasties, ritual duties, and cosmological concepts. But we know about them only through indirect hints. Some inscriptions indicate that these texts were kept in special repositories intended for those who know the path to the origins. Perhaps only the highest initiates had access to these books. The disappearance of such archives led to the loss of an entire layer of history that could have shed light on the origins of the Kush culture and its role in the region. It is hypothesized that the chronicles included descriptions of interactions between Kush and Egypt. It is known that these two civilizations had close ties, including periods of political unity. The Kushites, who ruled Egypt in the 8th to 7th centuries BCE, may have kept records of their reigns, rituals, and reformist actions. However, not a single such text has been found. Perhaps the Egyptians destroyed these chronicles, seeking to erase traces of the rule of a foreign dynasty. Or perhaps the Kushites themselves hid the texts in locations that remain undiscovered to this day. Also of interest is the fact that some temple inscriptions mention timekeepers, a group of priests whose job it was to observe the stars, record the cycles of the Nile, and document important events. If such timekeepers truly existed, they would have kept records similar to Egyptian annals. These texts would have contained a unique combination of astronomical observations and historical facts. The disappearance of these records leaves the picture of the region's history fragmented and incomplete. The question also concerns ritual texts. Complex ceremonies requiring precise adherence to a specific sequence of actions were performed in the temples of Kush. Manuals, instructions, or sacred hymns were typically created for such rituals. There is evidence that special halls were preserved in Meroe and Napata, where priests copied and stored texts. However, the documents themselves did not survive the destruction of the cities. Perhaps they were destroyed during wars or fires, or perhaps the priests hid them in burial complexes closed to the uninitiated. Another area of lost knowledge is medicine. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Kushites possessed methods of treating wounds, performed surgical techniques, and used herbs whose properties were meticulously studied. Some mummies reveal traces of surgeries performed with remarkable precision. This requires a developed medical tradition, likely recorded in writing. However, no medical texts have been found. They may have been written on organic materials such as leather or papyrus, which would not have survived in the sub-Saharan climate. The Kushites' knowledge of metals also remains a mystery. Archaeologists are discovering objects made from alloys that indicate a developed metallurgical system. Some objects are decorated with intricate patterns that required specialized tools and techniques. If the chronicles contain descriptions of metalworking methods, their disappearance closes an entire chapter in the history of the region's crafts. No less intriguing is the suggestion that the Kushites had their own cosmology. Some reliefs depict scenes related to the movements of celestial bodies, suggesting an understanding of astronomical processes. Some stelae contain symbols that may be part of a calendar system. Chronicles may have included descriptions of festivals based on celestial cycles. This knowledge could have been important for determining planting times, rituals, and political decisions. However, the most mysterious aspect of the lost chronicles is their possible connection to spiritual practices. The kings of Kush were perceived as intermediaries between gods and people. Some inscriptions indicate that rulers visited sacred sites where they received words of power or signs from their ancestors. If such practices were recorded in writing, the chronicles could have included esoteric texts intended for the initiation or training of priests. The loss of these documents means the disappearance of not only historical facts, but also an entire spiritual system. The disappearance of the Kush chronicles may have occurred gradually. After the fall of Meroe to the Aksumite Empire, urban centers were destroyed and temples abandoned. Oral tradition weakened, and written documents, written on fragile materials, disappeared. It's possible that some texts survived, ending up in private collections or secret repositories. But so far, no such discoveries have been made. Modern research is focused on deciphering the Meroitic script. Every new symbol, every new word, could become a key to unlocking this lost history. Scholars hope that once the script is fully understood, fragments of the lost chronicles will be reconstructed. However, even if this happens, much will remain forever lost. The lost chronicles of Kush remind us how easily an entire culture of knowledge can vanish. They also demonstrate that the history of the world is full of invisible pages, lost to time. And as we study the ruins, steles, and stone inscriptions, we can only sense the presence of a vast stratum of lost wisdom, a wisdom that once connected land, river, and sky, now dissolved into the silence of ancient deserts. Forgotten maps of Polynesia. In the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where waves roll across thousands of kilometers and the stars still serve as the only guides, a navigational tradition existed that still fascinates and perplexes researchers. Polynesian navigators reached numerous distant islands long before the advent of metal compasses and astronomical instruments. Their voyages seem almost incredible, given the absence of writing as we know it. But isolated references, legends, and rare physical evidence point to the existence of a lost cartographic system, the Forgotten Maps of Polynesia. Researchers have long puzzled over how Polynesian navigators navigated vast distances in the open ocean. It is known that they used stargazing, studied wave patterns, tracked bird migrations, and understood the nature of currents. But all these methods require a complex system of instruction that would have to be transmitted not only orally, but also recorded in a specific form. It is hypothesized that the ancient Polynesians had their own maps, distinct from conventional geographical representations. One of the most intriguing artifacts are the Marshall Islands navigational charts, unique frameworks made of sticks and shells. These charts show ocean wave directions, current interactions, and island locations using navigational landmarks rather than geographic coordinates. They represent visual models passed down from generation to generation. However, such charts have only been found among a small number of peoples. It is believed that in ancient times, such charts were used much more widely and in a more complex form. Experts suggest that the forgotten Polynesian maps may not have been physical objects in the traditional sense. They may have been mental maps encoded in rituals, songs, and symbols. However, some researchers argue that there were also tangible information carriers, woven panels, carved wooden tablets, and patterns on canoes and jewelry that could have included navigational instructions. These carriers were likely destroyed by time, climate, and European colonization. Of particular interest is how Polynesian navigators determined the location of islands they couldn't see. They used the phenomenon of clutter waves, large ocean waves reflected off the coast. These waves create unique patterns that an experienced navigator could use to determine the distance to an island. Perhaps the forgotten maps represented a system of notations for these waves. Each node on the map could represent a wave intersection, each line a direction of travel. If this hypothesis is correct, then maps were not abstract images, but functional tools. There are also legends about starboards, wooden slabs carved with lines corresponding to star-based routes. These boards likely served as training materials for young navigators. Although no authentic boards have survived, references to them are found in the oral traditions of some Polynesian peoples. This suggests that the maps may have had a symbolic form, understandable only to trained navigators. Another mystery is the training system. Navigators underwent extensive training, which included night observations, practice on the open sea, and the study of song formulas containing route information. Some songs describe sequences of stars appearing on the horizon in a specific order. These songs may have served as a kind of map, not visually, but in acoustic form. However, some of these songs disappeared or were distorted after contact with European missionaries. One of the most mysterious aspects of Polynesian navigation was the ability to predict weather and ocean movements. Some navigators claimed to be able to sense the approach of an island even when it was out of sight. This may have been due to a profound understanding of the interactions of waves, winds, and currents. But such abilities could also have been part of a system recorded in forgotten maps, where the interactions of natural forces were recorded in symbols, lines, and patterns. Many researchers believe that Polynesian maps disappeared because of the materials they were made from. Wood, fiber, bark, and reeds do not preserve well in tropical climates. Rain, moisture, and insects all destroyed potential artifacts. But the disappearance of maps is also linked to historical processes. Wars, migrations, ritual changes, and colonization led to the knowledge carriers being lost along with the practices. However, there are more mysterious explanations. Some legends say that the maps were passed on only to initiated navigators and were not intended to be stored in physical form. It was believed that knowledge could be distorted if written down. Therefore, the maps may have existed as ritual symbols that were destroyed after the training was completed. This explains why archaeologists have not found a significant number of navigational artifacts. Modern researchers are attempting to reconstruct forgotten maps from indirect evidence. They study travelers' texts, interview tradition bearers, analyze ocean patterns, and compare oral histories with canoe architecture. Some ethnographers argue that navigators used a multi-layered system: star charts, wave charts, wind charts, and current charts. Each of these could have existed in its own form and served different purposes. The forgotten maps of Polynesia represent a lost science where navigation, cosmology, and natural observations were integrated. These maps were more than just tools. They were a way to interact with the ocean, viewing the world not as an obstacle, but as a network of pathways. The loss of such maps means the disappearance of a unique perspective on space, natural phenomena, and the process of travel itself. Today, we see only a shadow of this knowledge, but within it lives the memory of how the Polynesians crossed the ocean without instruments, but with maps created by observation, intuition, and ritual discipline. And while the ocean holds its secrets, the forgotten maps of Polynesia remind us that even without writing, humans can create systems of knowledge as precise and profound as any scientific treatise. The undeciphered Rongorongo letter? In the middle of the Pacific Ocean lies an island whose name has become synonymous with mystery: Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island. Its stone giants, the Moai, often attract the attention of researchers, but no less of a mystery is the writing system, which the locals called Rongorongo. It developed in conditions of cultural isolation and has astonished scholars by its unlikeness to any known writing system. These signs, rhythmic rows of symbols engraved on wooden boards, represent one of the world's most enigmatic lost knowledge. Rongorongo consists of numerous figurines depicting people, animals, plants, and abstract forms. The signs are arranged in a unique manner. They are read in a so-called loop. A line is reversed at each end of the board. This method of writing is extremely rare and indicates a deep tradition, possibly linked to ritual significance. But the most puzzling aspect is that none of the boards have an exact translation. The language in which the text was created has changed or disappeared, and the context necessary for understanding has been lost. Some researchers suggest that Rongo-Rongo served to record genealogies and rituals. Some tablets contain sequences of figures that may represent cycles of time or family ties. If so, the writing may have been part of a priestly tradition intended to preserve the island's spiritual history. But if the priests possessed such a complex writing system, why did it cease to exist? The answer lies in the tragic fate of the Rapa Nui culture. It has been hypothesized that Rongo-Rongo developed from an earlier symbol system used to represent astronomical phenomena. Some tablets feature repeating elements that may reflect the movements of the sun, moon, or certain stars. This suggests that the writing may have been part of an astronomical calendar, allowing for the tracking of seasons and key ritual dates. However, in the absence of direct evidence, this interpretation remains speculative. Researchers are particularly interested in the possibility that the Rapa Nui script could have emerged without the influence of outside civilizations. If so, Rongo-Rongo represents a rare example of independent writing. However, some believe it may have incorporated elements from outside traditions, such as South American ones. These assumptions are based on isolated similarities between symbols, but the evidence is still insufficient. Regardless of its origin, Rongo-Rongo remains evidence of a unique intellectual tradition that disappeared before it could be understood. One of the most intriguing areas of research is the comparison of Rongo-Rongo with oral texts preserved in later legends. Some narratives describe rituals associated with the transmission of knowledge and mention talking boards used by priests during ceremonies. Perhaps these boards served not so much for reading in the traditional sense, but rather for the ritual reenactment of myths and rites. If so, writing was part of a sacred practice, accessible only to a select few. But why did this writing disappear? The primary cause is believed to be social collapse caused by environmental changes, intertribal conflicts, and external influences. When the system of power and priestly schools collapsed, the bearers of knowledge were destroyed or lost their influence. A writing system that wasn't used in everyday life could have disappeared in just 1 or 2 generations. The Rongo-Rongo tablets ceased to be part of ritual and thus lost their meaning. There are also more tragic theories. Some researchers believe that European colonizers destroyed a significant portion of the written artifacts, unaware of their value. Many of the trees used for making the boards were cut down, and local residents lost the ability to create new texts. Furthermore, epidemics and slavery led to the deaths of native speakers, making the decipherment of the script impossible as early as the 19th century. But even the surviving tablets reveal how complex the Rongo-Rongo system must have been. Repeating combinations of signs indicate the existence of a grammatical structure. Some figures change depending on the context, suggesting a sophisticated system of modifications. Perhaps the writing reflected not only a narrative, but also a symbolic language, where a single sign could have multiple meanings. A full understanding of this language would require knowledge of the ritual and social structure of Rapa Nui. Rongo-Rongo's connection to astronomy is particularly intriguing. Some sequences on the tablets resemble lunar cycles, while individual symbols may represent star groups. If the writing was indeed used to record astronomical observations, it may have been part of a unique scientific tradition. The loss of such a tradition means the disappearance of information about how the Rapa Nui people understood the cosmos, time, and their ritual duties. Modern research continues. Scientists are attempting to apply machine analysis methods to identify patterns in the text. Fragments of the lost Rapa Nui language are being reconstructed. However, without a bilingual inscription or dictionary, deciphering Rongo-Rongo is extremely difficult. Each new analysis provides only small glimmers of understanding, the repetition of signs, probable grammatical structures, hints of narrative fragments. But a complete picture remains elusive. The undeciphered Rongo-Rongo script is more than just a missing link in the history of writing. It's a vanished culture of thought that reflected the worldview of a people who lived at the edge of the earth. It's evidence that even the most remote civilizations were capable of creating complex systems of knowledge. And it's a reminder of the fragility of cultures whose traditions can vanish in just a single generation. Today, looking at wooden plaques with mysterious symbols, we see not only a lost language, but also vanished wisdom. Rongorongo awakens a desire to seek answers without ever providing one. It remains a symbol of a mystery hidden in the heart of one of the most isolated corners of the planet, a mystery that lives on in the rhythm of the ocean waves and the whisper of the winds over ancient islands. The vanished knowledge of ancient worlds reminds us that human wisdom runs far deeper than the surviving fragments allow. Every lost book, formula, or symbol reveals a void in which the breath of vanished civilizations can be felt. These traces, scattered across the world, form an invisible map of the past, where mystery becomes the only guide. And while the answers remain hidden, we continue to search for meaning in the silence of the lost.